Elsewhere on Capitol Hill, President Trump signed an order today imposing tariffs on about $60 billion worth of Chinese imports. The president says the measure will punish Beijing for the theft of American technology. Here to break down the move and China's potential response are Talking Points analysts Michael Furnari and Dan Prager. Michael and Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Now, obviously, President Trump saying that the issue here is the theft of intellectual property. Michael, can you break down exactly what that means for us?
Yeah, absolutely. This is President Trump's biggest move on trade yet, and the reasoning behind this is mostly due to some of the malpractice China is engaged in on trade, most notably, as you mentioned, intellectual property, but also currency manipulation. And the big concerns here is that a lot of companies are being forced into situations where their products are exploited by some of the weak enforcement of intellectual property laws in China.
And it was a pretty dramatic reaction to today's news. Dan, we obviously saw the stock market fall, but how else is the global economy reacting?
I mean, the stock market is huge. Fifth largest drop in the Dow in history, 700-point drop. I mean, people are terrified that this is going to start a trade war, and with good reason. China has reacted and said, hey, this is probably going to start a trade war. People are really scared. Pretty much everywhere in the stock market, things are going down. People are worried that prices on every item will go up. It helps a couple of people, a few thousand jobs in the U.S., but in the end, these imports are probably going to raise prices on a lot of consumer goods. People are worried that this might start a recession and a trade war.
Well, Dan, what I find interesting, like you said, is that certain people of certain sectors do find the tariffs helpful for their job security. And we saw Connor Lamb, the Democrat who won in the 18th District in Pennsylvania, use that to his advantage. He was supportive of tariffs. But Dan, like you said, in the long term, it could turn into a trade war. So while this may be a current win for President Trump, how do we think it plays out in the long term for him as we move into election season?
Well, Dan mentioned, just briefly to touch on this, Dan mentioned that there could be a possible trade war, and actually 5 minutes before we went on, it broke that China will be retaliating with billions of dollars of tariffs on, I think, notably aluminum, steel, pork, and wine. And the way that this plays out in the election, we'll see, but tariffs as an issue don't poll particularly poorly, but the problem may be for President Trump. The economy is really the only thing he has going for him right now, and if we get some losses economically for the country, it may be very difficult for President Trump to sell Republicans to voters.
And we've seen a lot of things that Trump has put tariffs on, notably think steel, aluminum, coal, and a lot of these things are kind of used to help his base. But in the end, really, one of the things that China has notably targeted and they're going to continue to target is farmers. The U.S. farm industry exports a lot to China, and China is going to use that to their advantage. Right now, they hold most of the cards, and while this may poll well right now for Trump's base and Republicans who are saying, this is good because China does mess with currency and steal intellectual property. But I think in the long run, this could have big economic implications for Middle America.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how these tariffs play in, especially with World Trade Organization rules and how things may fare there when it comes to international organizations. But we're going to have to leave the conversation there. We'll make sure we follow. Michael and Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.